Hello, everyone, and in this talk, we're going to talk about mass communication theories in sports media. You will see the course objectives right there because when we discuss mass communication theories, they do play into each of these course objectives. All the material that we have discussed so far, well, now we're going to wrap theory around that and make it more of a deeper conversation into sports media. So before we can even talk about what mass communication theories might apply in the context of sports media, we need to kind of back up and punt, so to speak, giving you a metaphor there, but we need to talk about really what a theory is. I like theories. I am one of those in my department who really enjoys talking about theories and finding ways to use theories to help shape the world in which I live, help to explain why things operate they do, help to explain my choices of media selections, help to explain how the media might influence me. So that's really what theories do. They help to explain the how and the what of things. Mass media influences are not siloed. In other words, we cannot say that mass media causes everything, that mass media is the result of everything. Okay, there's actually some kind of fluid movement that goes between media and a part of the world. In our case, it's sports. So that is really the number one agreement among many in media scholarship, is that you cannot think of media influences as something that just happens because of the media. There are other factors at play. It can be age, it can be gender, it can be culture. So there are a number of other variables when we're talking about theory. So as we approach this topic, you need to understand that mass media theories just kind of help maybe explain some things, but it's not the end explanation. And that's why mass communication is a little difficult to study. It is complex because of these different variables. You've got opinion leaders to add into the mix. You've got the characteristics of various sportscasters, for instance, into putting it into our context. What happens, how media might influence one population, it's not probably going to influence another. So there are a number of different things here. However, it's still good to have a theory to kind of maybe help explain, argue, shape our arguments. It's also important to talk about how we started this idea of mass communication theories. Now, if you go back to what we have talked about historically, especially with mass media really taking off in the early 20th century, as we began to see advancements in newspapers, and then a few decades later, a couple decades later actually, with radio, and then of course television, it became an important part of the social science field. We give a lot of credit to Charles Horton Cooley, who really helped to begin the studies on mass media theories. He really studied first the effects of print media. There's also media research that has increased individuality aspects to it, and then also looking at the limited distribution components of media research. It also has helped to inspire a lot of studies, many studies over the past several decades. There are thousands of them actually, and it's all because of the way we try to understand how certain phenomena happen in media. So let's start to look at a few of them. Some of these theories are grouped together. For instance, when we're talking about the power of media, one large theory that comes to mind is known as the hypodermic needle model. And this is the belief that media work to inject the public with various thoughts, perceptions, and other maybe even attitudes. So in other words, the media actually cause the public to think this way. This thought actually began with Harold Lasswell, who was a political scientist and also a communication theorist. Mass communication played a large role in World War I, in the early part of the 20th century, in the around 1914, then on into a period of time after that war, and then picking up again with World War II. Political propaganda was really huge with this. And what political propaganda is nothing more than just pieces of communication designed to gather support for whatever the political objective might be. And we still see political propaganda today. It may not be as obtrusive as it was then, but it still exists today. And then we talk about how theories have developed over time after that hypodermic needle model. One theory that really began to surface later was known as the selective perception theory. It's a theory still studied today. And this indicates that people respond and perceive media messages differently based on their own needs and interests. So for instance, I'm going to select certain messages that really align with my needs, with my interests, with my beliefs. So for instance, many of you know that I run, so obviously I'm going to look to those media sources that are credible in the world of running. So that's an example of selective perception theory in the context of sports media. Uses and gratifications is another one that has developed in the middle part of the 20th century. We give credit to Lazarsfeld and Katz for developing this theory. This theory places greater influence on personal needs and the individual uses of media. In other words, it explains the how and why we choose the messages we consume. Again, a number of things. We might use a certain medium for X reason, and then we also use this medium for another reason as to how it gratifies our needs. So people use media to satisfy specific needs. That's the bottom line of this theory. The two-step theory indicates that messages are first processed by the opinion leaders, and then they kind of put a little spin on it in order to be disseminated to the way they want it. We see this often in political spheres, definitely in the context of politics. We're seeing that with presidential campaigns, so they definitely use a two-step theory in the fight that we are seeing against the COVID-19 disease. You're going to see all kinds of messages from the health field, and then maybe there's opinion leaders there and how they actually spin those messages before they are disseminated to the public. How do we do this in sports? Well, we do the same thing. Sometimes your own sports media organizations will do this. They will act as the opinion leaders, and they will put a spin on certain pieces of information, on feature stories. They frame it the way that they want to, but there's a two-step process in this. So first they get a hold of the message, and then they're able to manipulate it the way they would like to see it before then second it's disseminated. Technological determinism is really a great one to study in this period of time with sports media as well as just any kind of media. These are direct messages, but there's also an indirect influence here. So the focus is on the impact of the media, really not the message. So Marshall McLuhan really developed this theory in which his famous statement is the medium is the message. In other words, we don't really care what the message is. It's how that message is being shared. So the power possibly in television, the power of the internet. In other words, people might believe a certain message because it came from a television show. So the idea is on the medium, not necessarily the message. People like Marshall McLuhan are known as the medium theorist, in which they really believe that it's the actual medium that holds the power, not the message itself. And that communication media then are really nothing more than extensions of the human mind and body. And we have formed what is called today this global village. Think about even your own social media use. This could really relate extremely well to that. Here's a kind of a large graphic slide about technological determinism. On the left side, you will see all the major points of what this theory is about. Again, the medium is the message. The form is the important point, not the content. In fact, the way people see it, the content gets in the way. I want to enjoy reading a sports story, but I don't want to use the newspaper to do that. I want to be able to maybe read it in a more interactive way. So maybe I'll choose online or even on social media, for instance. Electronic media is really pivotal with this theory because it extends our sight. It has the ability to extend our hearing and then our touch. Basically, electronic media is ideal for this theory because it helps to tie the world together. Again, think about social media. So on the right side of the slide, you will see the hot and cool distinctions. Well, the hot media is kind of what I would frame more as the traditional media. It's very high in definition, so high in content and information, really fatty in that, if you will. And then the print media is an example of the hot media, because think about what a newspaper and a magazine do, especially in the print form. Whereas cool media, it's not about, again, the content. It's about the medium. So we get to participate in it somehow. Social media, digital, online, electronic, all of those ways in which we prefer cool media in relation to this theory. So as the decades of media theory development really started to take shape, we then kind of just shifted our concentration just a little bit in talking about media effects. And that's kind of where we are today. And I think the technological determinism model really helped to segue us into this part. So with modern media effects, what we're talking about here is how the public thinks they are affected by the media. So it's no longer what the media do to us. Now it's all about how do we see the way that we are affected by media. So that's the shift in the theory developments as to how they came to focus on media effects. So one of the theories that really is part of this is the third person effects hypothesis. This is where people believe media messages influence others more than themselves. In other words, people think that video games won't have an effect on them, but it has an effect on other people. A lot of this started in the 70s with children's programming, for instance, especially with violence and looking at how children, how maybe violent media might affect children, but it won't affect mine. So that's kind of that third person effects hypothesis. Indirect effects model is where people perceive the effect that media messages have on others, and then they react to their perception. So for instance, looking in the context of maybe video games, we place a lot of criticism on video games. People think that if you play video games, then you are probably, then some people have this translation that it leads to laziness, maybe violence, lackadaisical behavior, when really sometimes, and research has shown this, but even video games can help strengthen the mind. However, it's this indirect effects model that people have used to explain that really it's the way that people react to video games, and that's the way it is. So if they see that video games are causing violent behavior, then that's their, through the indirect effects model, then that's their reaction to that behavior. Other media effect theories include several. These are just a few that I've listed. Catharsis theory, where we look at really with television in this, but media outlets of all kinds, how they can ease children's urges to participate in violent behavior. Some people think that if a child who is exhibiting violent behavior, if maybe they're exposed more to maybe television programming that can help to ease that violent behavior, and then that could be a possibility. Cultivation theory is extremely popular. Again, focusing on television is how a lot of these theories started, but television shapes the way in which we see the world. We still see that, and sports media contributes to that as well. The agenda setting theory, it was developed in 1972, again during the height of the television dominance era, but the media does not really tell you what to think. What it does, it sets the agenda. It tells you what to think about. I have not listed it on this slide, but that theory has also evolved, where there's also another version that Shaw has helped to develop in recent years, and it's known as the affective, AFFECTIVE, affective agenda setting theory. So it just kind of extends it to say that no, the media doesn't tell you what to think. It tells you not only what to think about, but how to think about it. That's what effective means, is the how. So these theories will continue to evolve. However, you've now have the foundational information about a lot of these theories. So as we were going through them, you probably have thought of one, wow, that probably describes the way I consume sports media. But that's a question to ask yourself and to review these theories and see which ones really might describe how you select certain sports media, maybe even how sports media might influence you. And then which theories do you think apply to sports media content? Those are questions you will explore in this module. Thank you for listening.